world addicted to noise, the woman who does not chase attention becomes the one people quietly admire the most. She doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Her presence speaks louder than arguments. Her silence does not ask for validation. It gives others the space to reflect, to notice, and to return to their own center. This is not about playing games or using silence as punishment. It is about becoming a woman so in tune with herself that silence becomes her sanctuary and her greatest statement. You see, the silent woman is often misunderstood. But she is not silent because she lacks words. She is silent because she has learned their value. There is a kind of quiet that is not born of fear or insecurity, but of strength, deep, composed, and rooted in self-awareness. A woman who learns to win without words is not someone who is withholding or disengaged. Rather, she is someone who has understood the immense power of presence, the profound energy that rests in silence. In a world obsessed with being heard, she chooses to understand first. In a world racing to speak, she chooses to feel. There is an old Eastern teaching that says, "Still waters run deep." The river that moves the slowest often carries the most force beneath its surface. This is the nature of true silence. It is not the absence of sound. It is the fullness of inner alignment. A woman who walks this path discovers that silence is not weakness. It is mastery over reaction. And in the realm of relationships, this kind of mastery becomes a sanctuary for herself and a mirror for others. When we feel triggered, the immediate human impulse is to react, to respond, to justify. Neuroscience teaches us that this impulse comes from the amygdala, the part of our brain responsible for emotional responses, especially those related to fear and threat. But a woman who masters the art of silence learns how to pause. That pause, those few seconds of restraint, allow the signal to travel upward to the prefrontal cortex, where reason lives, where empathy resides, where perspective is found. In that pause, there is no war to fight. There is no battle to win. There is only clarity. Consider the story of Lena, a woman in her mid-50s who had spent years in a difficult marriage marked by constant verbal tension. Every disagreement became a cycle of shouting, defending, and emotional fatigue. One day she made a decision, not to fight, not to argue, not to retreat either, but simply to not respond immediately. She would listen, not with the intention to reply, but to understand. She would allow silence to hold space between stimulus and reaction. At first, her husband mocked her calm. He accused her of being cold. But over time, something shifted. Without the emotional fuel he was used to, the fire of conflict began to die down. What replaced it was surprising curiosity. He began to ask questions, to reflect, to feel the weight of his own words without resistance. This is the quiet influence of a woman who has chosen mastery over reaction. She does not aim to control others. She has simply learned to control herself. Her silence is not a wall, it is a doorway into deeper truth. In relationships, especially romantic ones, many women are conditioned to believe that their value is tied to how much they express, explain, or prove themselves. But wisdom shows us that the more grounded you are in your inner truth, the less external validation you need. A woman who remains composed in the face of misunderstanding does not do so because she agrees. She does so because she understands the futility of proving something to someone who is not ready to receive it. True power is not about dominating others. It is about being so deeply anchored in your own essence that no storm can move you. This is not a power of volume. It is a power of vibration. And so silence becomes your ally, not because it avoids discomfort, but because it transcends it. Think of the moments when someone insulted you, and you responded with a calm gaze, a gentle breath, and no defense. What happened in that space? Did the insult vanish? No, but its power over you disappeared, The moment we stop allowing others to dictate our emotional climate, we begin to win without words. This kind of presence is rare. It's magnetic. People don't always understand it, but they feel it. That's why, in every room, the most silent person often commands the deepest respect, not because of fear, but because others instinctively sense that they are listening, observing, thinking, choosing, not reacting. In psychology, this form of control is known as emotional regulation. It is the ability to manage one's internal states in a healthy and constructive way. It's the opposite of emotional reactivity. And contrary to popular belief, emotional regulation does not mean suppressing your feelings. It means feeling deeply, then responding from a place of clarity rather than compulsion. A woman who regulates her emotions through silence is not disconnected. She is deeply connected to herself. She no longer allows temporary emotions to sabotage permanent relationships. She no longer allows the moods of others to hijack her peace. This is the foundation of self-respect. And from this self-respect emerges a new form of communication, one where your energy, your presence, your boundaries speak more than words ever could. Now imagine the power this brings into your relationships, not just romantic ones, but all connections. Your children begin to mirror your calm. Your coworkers feel safe in your presence. Your partner begins to trust your silence more than the noise of the world. This is not the silence of retreat. It is the silence of a lighthouse, unmoving, unwavering, glowing in stillness. But this stillness is not easily won. It is cultivated. It is chosen. Again and again, in moments of provocation, we must practice it. It may feel unnatural at first, especially for those who were raised to speak quickly, defend often, and always be nice. But real maturity is not about being agreeable. It is about being grounded. Emotional discipline, then, is not something we are born with. It is something we train like a muscle. Every time you choose to wait before responding, every time you breathe instead of reacting, every time you sit with discomfort rather than escape it, you are building this discipline. And over time, it becomes part of you. You become a sanctuary, not just for others, but for yourself. There's a profound story from the East about a woman named Jiai. She was known in her village for her stillness. People often brought their troubles to her, not because she gave the best advice, but because she knew how to listen without interruption, how to look without judgment, how to be fully present. One day, a man came to her filled with anger. He ranted for hours about betrayal, injustice, and heartbreak. Jiai said nothing. She served him tea. She listened. When he was done, he asked, "Why don't you say anything?" She looked at him and said, "You have spoken so much that you have not yet heard yourself." In that silence, something broke inside him. The armor fell off. Tears followed, and healing began, not through words, but through presence. That is the essence of emotional discipline, through silence. It is not cold. It is compassionate. It does not ignore emotions. It honors them by giving them the space to breathe without controlling the room. And from that space comes understanding. Many women today are exhausted not because they do too much, but because they feel too much, and they're never given space to process those feelings. Silence, used wisely, is that space. It allows your nervous system to rest. It allows your heart to recalibrate. It allows your mind to filter what's real from what's reaction. In modern science, this space is supported by what is known as vagal tone, the health of your vagus nerve, which controls the rest and digest system of the body. People with high vagal tone can return to calm faster after stress. Meditation, deep breathing, and stillness all improve vagal tone. So when you choose silence, you are not just being spiritual, you are literally rewiring your body for safety, clarity, and strength. Relationships built on reactivity are unstable. But when one person begins to master silence, not the manipulative kind, but the centered kind, everything starts to change. Arguments lose their urgency. Words become intentional. Conversations go deeper. And above all, you no longer lose yourself in the noise of others. The world will always provoke you. People will test your limits. But your true power lies in how little they can control your inner state. A silent woman is not indifferent. She is invincible because her emotions are not in the hands of others. And so silence becomes your daily practice, not just in moments of conflict, but throughout your day. You pause before replying to a text. You sit in stillness before making a decision. You listen more than you speak. You let silence be your teacher. This kind of woman is not praised loudly, but she is remembered deeply. Her silence is not an absence. It is a presence that changes the temperature of every relationship she enters. A presence that reveals what truly matters. A presence that whispers. Peace is not found in winning arguments. It is found in winning yourself. And when you win yourself, your composure, your clarity, your center, you win without words. There is an invisible strength in a woman who does not feel the need to explain herself constantly, to fill silences with words, or to defend her value through conversation. Her silence is not avoidance, it is presence. And her words, when they do come, are few but full. In a society where voices compete to be the loudest, where so much energy is spent proving, convincing, and reacting, there is something unforgettable about the woman who speaks with intention, not impulse. People hear her differently, not because she says more, but because she says less. And when she does speak, people listen. Human psychology affirms this truth. Research in communication science has shown that individuals who speak deliberately, with measured tone and controlled tempo, are perceived as more competent, trustworthy, and powerful. But the deeper reality is this: when a person chooses to hold their energy in silence, others feel that energy more acutely than if it had been spoken. The mystery of it, the restraint, the clarity, it all adds gravity to her presence. This principle reveals a powerful truth in relationships. When a woman does not rush to fill the silence, her words carry more weight. It is not about playing games or being mysterious. It's about alignment. Her silence says, I am not desperate to be heard. I speak when I have something meaningful to share. I am not moved by urgency. I am anchored in awareness. Take the example of a woman named Mesa, a retired schoolteacher in her 60s. In her earlier years, she believed she needed to keep everyone around her emotionally comfortable by smoothing over conflict with constant reassurance and talking through every disagreement. Over time, she noticed a pattern. Her words were often dismissed or ignored, not because they lacked value, but because they were given too freely. There was no boundary around her speech. She poured herself into people who were not prepared to receive her truth. But something shifted when she began practicing silence. During an argument with her grown daughter, Mesa chose not to interrupt, not to justify, not to raise her voice. She listened, fully, openly, but responded only after taking time to sit with her thoughts. Her reply was brief, calm, and firm, and it changed the entire dynamic. Her daughter, for the first time, truly heard her, not because Mesa raised her voice, but because her energy had changed. Her silence wasn't passive, it was purposeful. This is the effect of presence without noise. When you stop using your voice to seek approval, your voice becomes a vessel of truth, and your truth becomes undeniable. There's a quote that says, "The quieter you become, the more you are able to hear." But the inverse is also true. The quieter you become, the more others are able to feel what you say. This is because silence magnifies essence. It removes distraction, it reveals intention. And intention is what connects hearts, not cleverness, not volume, not persuasion. In romantic relationships, especially, this principle becomes vital. Often, people mistake love for emotional accessibility at all times, but love without boundaries dissolves into emotional chaos. When a woman holds space in silence, especially when provoked or misunderstood, she creates a container for real connection. She doesn't react to every mood swing, every criticism, every slight. Her silence becomes a mirror in which the other person can see themselves more clearly. And when a man is met with such depth, such unwavering calm, it awakens something ancient in him: respect, reverence, a desire to rise to the level of her presence. In one particular story, a woman named Amira had been in a relationship with a man who constantly pushed her emotional boundaries, testing her with inconsistency, withholding affection, and then over-explaining his way back into her life. Each time she engaged, she texted back, she explained her feelings, she forgave too quickly, and each time she felt smaller, less respected, more emotionally unstable. Until one day she stopped explaining, she stopped sending long messages. She didn't disappear, but she no longer filled the silence. She gave space instead of seeking closeness. And something remarkable happened. The man, for the first time, began to experience the weight of his actions. Not because she demanded an apology, but because the absence of her reaction was louder than any words she had ever spoken. Her silence had become sacred. It told the truth she never needed to say aloud. This kind of silence is not cold. It is clarity wrapped in restraint, and it is deeply felt by those who have ears to hear. Not just physical ears, but emotional ears. When you remove your voice from places where it's not honored, your silence becomes a lesson that cannot be ignored. But this requires internal alignment. A woman must know her worth, not intellectually, but somatically. She must feel her value in her bones. Only then does her silence carry the kind of weight that commands attention. If her silence is rooted in fear or avoidance, it will echo with uncertainty. But if her silence is born from self-awareness, it will speak louder than any argument. This leads us into the deeper reality of energy. Because even silence is not empty. Silence carries vibration. Silence carries presence. And a woman's energy, when it is no longer entangled in the chaos of others, becomes magnetic. It draws people in, not because she is trying to be attractive, but because she is aligned. Her peace becomes rare in a world of emotional noise. This is why silent women lead with energy, not with noise. They are not trying to be understood. They are already understanding. They are not chasing validation. They have already validated themselves. And so their energy speaks before their mouths ever open. Eastern philosophy teaches that our chi, our life force, is scattered every time we speak unnecessarily, every time we engage in conflict, every time we defend ourselves against those unwilling to understand us. But when we conserve that energy, when we move with intention, we preserve our power. That preserved energy becomes presence, and that presence speaks. Imagine walking into a room where someone is calm, silent, yet fully alert. You feel them before they speak. You sense their groundedness. You instinctively respect their space. That's not charisma. That's coherence. Their inner and outer world are aligned, and you feel safe in their energy because they are safe within themselves. Consider Nadia, a woman in her 40s who worked in a high-pressure corporate environment. She used to speak often in meetings, trying to prove her intelligence, trying to be seen. But her ideas were often overlooked. One day, after a particularly difficult week, she attended a leadership retreat, where she learned a different approach: to center herself before speaking, to engage from inner alignment, and to allow silence to do the initial talking. She began practicing this at work. She said less, but her eyes were more attentive, her body more still. her energy more contained. Soon, her input began to carry more influence. Not because her ideas had changed, but because her energy had. She was no longer chasing approval. She had become the embodiment of confidence, and that was felt. People don't just hear your words. They feel your presence. They read your posture, your breath, your facial stillness, your emotional stability. When you are centered, your silence becomes an invitation, not a withdrawal. It becomes a force field, not a defense mechanism. And in relationships, this energetic leadership is transformative. A silent woman who has done her inner work no longer begs to be heard. She listens to herself first. She doesn't argue for her value. She walks in it. She doesn't explain her standards. She embodies them. And because of this, the people around her begin to shift. Some leave because they cannot meet her vibration. Others rise because they've never seen such depth modeled before. There is nothing passive about this kind of silence. It is active. It is vibrant. It is alive with discernment. It chooses when to speak, when to act, and when to rest. It recognizes that not every situation requires a response, that not every conflict needs a conclusion, that sometimes the most powerful transformation happens in stillness. This doesn't mean you withhold your truth. It means you share it wisely. You speak from overflow, not desperation. You wait until your emotions have settled, and then you speak from your center, not your storm. In the realm of emotional connection, this presence becomes healing. Partners who have spent their lives in chaos often find themselves magnetically drawn to a silent woman, not because she saves them, but because she doesn't join their drama. She doesn't match their instability. She becomes a mirror they cannot ignore. Her stillness exposes their noise. Her quiet standards reveal their lack of boundaries. And in that reflection, they are faced with a choice: grow or go. It is said that energy introduces you before you speak. This is more than poetic, it's biological. The heart emits an electromagnetic field that is measurable several feet outside the body. People feel your coherence before they hear your words. This is why the woman who holds her energy, who disciplines her emotions, and who protects her peace becomes unforgettable. She walks into a room and shifts the atmosphere, not by trying, but by being. This is not learned through performance. It is practiced through presence. It is earned through healing. It is cultivated in silence. A woman who no longer bleeds energy through constant explanation, who no longer gives her voice to people who don't value it, becomes a woman of substance. Her silence is no longer a reaction. It is a response. It is not emptiness. It is depth. She has learned that energy speaks, that boundaries speak, that stillness speaks. And in that silence, she becomes powerful. Not in the way the world defines power, but in the way the soul recognizes it, calm, anchored, and unapologetically alive. There is a quiet authority that comes from knowing you owe no one an explanation. This is not arrogance. It is clarity. It is the confidence that your boundary does not require validation to be legitimate. That your silence does not mean indecision, but rather a decision so complete, it doesn't need to be defended. When a woman begins to understand the value of this, her entire approach to communication shifts. She no longer overextends herself emotionally. She no longer feels the urge to soften her truth for others' comfort. She learns to stand firmly, speak briefly, and let her actions finish the sentence her words never needed to begin. The need to explain ourselves often comes from a deeper desire to be accepted, understood, or approved of. But the more we explain, especially to those who are not truly listening, the more we dilute our message. A boundary is not a debate. It is not a request for understanding. It is a line drawn from the awareness of what protects your peace. And peace is not something you negotiate. It is something you choose and then protect In relationships, women are often taught that to be kind is to be endlessly available, to soften every edge, to justify every no. But this kind of behavior rarely leads to deeper connection. In fact, it often leads to resentment. Over-explaining is a form of self-betrayal. It says, I don't fully trust that my truth is enough, so let me wrap it in stories, soften it with apologies, and dress it up with details so you will accept it. But the truth doesn't need decoration. It only needs presence. There is a story of a woman named Heng who, after years in a relationship where her boundaries were constantly overlooked, began to change. Before, when she said no, she would follow it with long justifications. I'm tired. I already have plans. I hope you understand. But after a long period of emotional burnout, something shifted. The next time she was asked to do something that didn't align with her peace, she simply said, no, thank you. And then she remained quiet. There was no need for explanation. The person on the other side waited for more, but none came. And in that moment, a new version of her was born. Not the woman who begged to be understood, but the woman who had understood herself. The clarity of a short answer reveals the maturity of long reflection. A woman who can say less without guilt has traveled through the forest of over-giving and emerged with a new compass. That compass no longer points toward people-pleasing, but toward self-preservation. And not the kind of preservation that builds walls, but the kind that builds inner rooms where her truth can rest safely. In the study of behavioral psychology, it's well documented that those who maintain firm boundaries without justification are perceived as more secure, more respected, and more emotionally stable. This is not because they are cold. It's because they project certainty. When someone explains too much, they open the door for negotiation. But when someone states their boundary simply and calmly, the conversation ends not with tension, but with finality. This does not mean we must be dismissive or rude. It means we recognize the sacred nature of our energy and we no longer give it away cheaply. Silence after a no is not avoidance, it's alignment. And it teaches those around you that your time, your heart, and your energy are not up for casual consumption. Nowhere is this more important than in romantic relationships. In love, we often blur lines. We excuse behavior. We tolerate too much. And when we finally try to assert ourselves, we feel the urge to cushion the boundary with soft language so we won't seem harsh. But the more you explain your boundary, the more you open it for debate. And the moment your boundary becomes negotiable, it is no longer a boundary, it's a suggestion. Consider Tara, a woman in her late 40s, who had spent most of her adult life explaining herself to the men she loved. She explained why she needed time alone. She explained why she felt hurt. She explained why she was walking away from relationships that drained her. And each time, the explanations became doorways for guilt and gaslighting until she stopped. One day, she ended a relationship not with paragraphs, but with a sentence. This no longer supports the woman I'm becoming. That was it. No anger, no justification, just truth. And in that truth, she was free. Not because the other person understood her, but because she had stopped needing them to. There is a wisdom in holding silence after the truth. It protects your energy. It trains others how to treat you. It communicates not just your words, but your self-respect. And this kind of self-respect is not loud. It is still. It does not tremble. It does not flinch. It simply exists unapologetically. It's also important to understand how this practice affects the nervous system. When we constantly over-explain, we activate the stress response in our bodies. We tense up, our heart rate increases. We anticipate rejection. But when we set a boundary and sit with the silence that follows, our body learns that we are safe, even without approval. Over time, this rewires the brain to associate boundaries not with conflict, but with peace. This is a vital form of emotional reparenting. Most women were raised to believe that love is earned through effort, that you must explain yourself to be loved. But real love does not require you to shrink your truth or stretch your peace. Real love honors your no. It doesn't punish your silence. It respects your space. This leads us into the deeper foundation of connection, awareness. Inner awareness is the soil from which all outer relationships grow. A woman who knows herself deeply is not easily manipulated. She is not easily impressed. And she is not easily broken, because her worth is not built on how others see her. It is built on how clearly she sees herself. When a woman becomes aware of her emotional patterns, her needs, her values, and her wounds, she stops seeking completion outside of herself. She stops chasing people to fill her silence. She no longer fears being misunderstood because she has understood herself. And that understanding becomes her emotional home, a home she no longer invites just anyone into. A powerful example of this is Olivia, a woman in her early 60s who had grown tired of surface-level connections. She began a process of deep self-inquiry, journaling, therapy, solitude. Through this, she realized that much of her communication had been driven by the fear of abandonment. She had spoken not to express, but to avoid silence, to prevent people from leaving. But once she discovered this route, she began to speak less and observe more. In that space, she found something she had never known before: peace without people. And from that peace, she attracted a partner who didn't need her to perform, explain, or impress, only to be. Her inner awareness had shaped her outer experience. This is the power of self-connection. When a woman is full within herself, she doesn't walk into a room needing to be seen. She walks in already seen by herself. That self-seeing is what makes her radiant. That quiet confidence is what makes her unforgettable. Because energy doesn't lie, and people feel when you are rooted. In Eastern wisdom, this rootedness is described as being like a tree with deep roots. Storms may come, winds may blow, but she does not fall, because she is anchored, and her anchoring comes not from what others give her, but from what she has cultivated within. This kind of woman doesn't need to yell to be heard. She doesn't need to chase to be chosen. She doesn't need to explain to be respected. Her presence does the work her words once tried to do. She listens deeply, to herself first, then to others. She feels her emotions fully, but she is not ruled by them. She speaks only when speaking adds value. Otherwise, she lets silence do the talking. People don't always understand her. Some feel uncomfortable around her calm, but that discomfort is not her problem. It is their invitation. An invitation to meet her where she is. An invitation to rise. And when others are ready, they follow that invitation. Because silence does not repel those who are aligned with your truth. It only repels those who sought to distract you from it. This is the quiet revolution of a woman who no longer performs, who no longer explains, who no longer waits for permission to be herself. She lives with the awareness that not all connection is meant to be permanent, that not all silence needs to be filled, that not all love requires a soundtrack. She becomes the embodiment of peace. Not the peace that comes from being unbothered, but the peace that comes from having been deeply bothered and healing anyway. And in that healing, her silence becomes sacred, her boundaries become sacred, her energy becomes sacred, and those who wish to stand beside her must learn to walk in that sacred space, not by being perfect, but by being present, not by knowing everything, but by being willing to listen. Not just with their ears, but with their hearts. Because a woman who listens to herself teaches others how to listen to her too. And in a world of noise, her silence becomes a a compass that points not north, but inward, always inward, toward what is real, what is whole, what is true. When a woman learns to win without words, she becomes more than someone who responds. She becomes someone who influences, shapes, and redirects the very energy around her. She is no longer enslaved to noise, drama, or the constant need to explain herself. She chooses presence over performance, stillness over struggle, and clarity over chaos. This kind of silence is not an absence. It is a presence so powerful that it demands respect without ever raising its voice. In a world where people are often quick to react, defend, or assert, she does something revolutionary. She observes, she reflects, and she allows her energy to speak louder than her words ever could. And this quiet power does not push or force. It attracts, it teaches, and it transforms. Her silence is a prayer, a boundary, a declaration that says, I know who I am, and I don't need to convince you. From this place of grounded inner mastery, relationships shift. People treat her differently, not because she demands it, but because she embodies it. Those who carry chaos can no longer thrive near her. Those who carry peace are drawn to her. This woman does not fear solitude because she has befriended herself. She does not shrink in the presence of conflict because she has trained her heart to stay calm. She does not seek validation because she lives in alignment with truth. Her silence becomes her signature. Her presence becomes her power. And through her way of being, not merely doing, she inspires others to raise their own awareness, to walk with more care, and to speak with more purpose. This is the power of winning without words. Not through dominance, but through dignity. Not through force, but through stillness. And not through noise, but through unwavering, undeniable presence.